Hello, everybody. This is Alex. I'm recording week four's lecture, which is Introduction to Poetry and Symbolism and Theme. I am going to be using PowerPoint again to show you some various things that you need to know about poetry. So without further ado, let us do that. Here's the thing, Introduction to Poetry. So this week we're going to go over Indian Coping Mechanisms, which is a book of poetry by Billy Ray Belcourt. Um, and just so you know a little bit about Billy Ray Belcourt, I'm going to actually read the back of this poetry book. Billy Ray Belcourt is from the Driftpile Cree Nation and lives on the internet. His debut book of poems, This Wound is a World, won the 2018 Griffin Poetry Prize and the 2018 Robert Croce City of Edmonton Book Prize, and was named the most significant book of poetry in English by an emerging Indigenous writer at the 2018 Indigenous Voices Awards. It was also a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award, the Gerald Lampert Memorial Award, and the Raymond Souster Award. It was named by CBC Books as the best Canadian poetry collection of the year. Billy Ray is a PhD candidate and a 2018 Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation Scholar in the Department of English and Film Studies at the University of Alberta. A 2016 Rhodes Scholar, he holds a master's degree in women's studies from Wadham College at the University of Oxford. In January 2020, he will be an assistant professor in the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. So that was the back of the book. So I'm gonna go into poetry now. What is poetry? So poetry is generally something that is written in verse rather than in prose. So what does that mean? So verse is a little bit different. It's more lyrical. It's sort of like a song, rather than prose, which is very straightforward, and written in paragraphs. However, you should note that there are prose poems out there that play with form. So there are poems that um, actually do sort of use a prose format, but are actually poems. For example, if you turn to page 17 in your book of Indian coping mechanisms, the poem Cree Girl Blows Up the Necropolis of Ottawa is an example of a prose poem. Um, there's also rhyme, rhythm, and meter to reading poems, which makes it a little bit different from reading prose. Prose is generally easy to read as long as you know where the punctuation is, whereas a poem, you sort of need to know what the rhythm is, what the meter is, in order to read it for it to make sense. So when you're looking at verse, there is different ways of looking at what makes up a poem. So there are stanzas. Stanzas are sort of like paragraphs or breaks in a poem that indicate a different idea or a flow of reading. So if you come across something um, like, let's see if I can find a. Um, if you look at page 5 of Indian Coping Mechanisms, there's a poem called Indian Brothers, which has 4 stanzas on the first page and a final stanza on the next page. So um, this one has clear breaks in between 4-line stanzas, so that you can see what a stanza is. Um, Rhyme is when words either internally or at the end of lines have the same sound. So if you were rhyming with sound, you would say something like ground, um, to rhyme with the words at the end. Or if you were trying to rhyme internally, you would have 2 different things with the same sound within the same line. Rhythm is the pace at which you read the poem. And then a stress is where you add emphasis to a syllable. So when you're looking at what a stress is, if you've heard of, like, if you're looking at a Shakespeare play, if you've heard of iambic pentameter, um, then you can understand sort of what a stress is, because when you read a line, you stress certain parts of the line, and in an iambic pentameter, it sort of goes down, up, down, up, down, up. So you have like different stresses in different on different syllables of words. Um, so why poetry? Why do we read poetry? So a poem can make strange something that seems obvious or clear. So when I say make strange, what I mean is that it gives a sort of like otherworldliness, or like makes it not familiar anymore. Like if you were looking at the sun, you say, "Okay, I know what the sun is." And then an author or a poet would come along and use some sort of metaphor or simile or symbol in order to make the sun a little bit weird. Like it doesn't make sense anymore, or it doesn't make complete sense anymore. And it sort of gives you a sense of unease, that this doesn't necessarily makes make complete, straight, or obvious sense. It's sort of unsettling, um, and I think that that's why some people don't enjoy poetry. Is that they don't like that aspect of poetry. Is that it makes something unfamiliar that was once familiar. Um, Poetry is sort of an artistic form, using words and their arrangement to make meaning. So, um, poetry, you can play around with all sorts of different aspects of the poem, such as lines and what you're doing with the poem. So, I have some examples, such as if you look at page 26 and 27, there's a poem called I Douche While Kesha's Praying plays from my iPhone on repeat. And everything in this poem is capitalized. There's use of italics, and there's use of slashes in order to separate ideas, but the lines all run together. So there's that one. And then a different one that I particularly like is on page, let's see, what page is this actually? 42? Um, or 43. Yeah, 43. Um, and it just has the same line written over and over again, except it's all blurred together. So that one's really interesting too. So poems sort of question form and narrative frameworks. So it's sort of like um, something that challenges form and narrative frameworks. So that's why we do, well, learn poetry, I think, is because it teaches you how to question things and how to um, challenge the sort of obviousness of things. So you can sort of see that it questions how things usually are, and that's why it's uncomfortable as well, is that a lot of people aren't used to questioning the way things usually work. So um, it really sort of challenges or pushes the reader to actually do these things, and it's difficult for people to do that sometimes. So when we look at form, there are stanzas, which I already explained, lines, which are just like individual, um, one line starts and then ends, and then it goes to the next line. A caesura. Okay, so a caesura is sort of weird. A caesura is a break in the line. So if you've ever read Beowulf, which is a medieval poem, um, a Danish medieval poem, um, it has a caesura all the way throughout the poem, in which um, the line starts over here, and then there's the middle, and then there's a break, and then the line continues. So you sort of have like an interesting way of sort of breaking up the lines. I don't think there's a, let's see if I can find a example in this. I think there might have been. There was, I swear there was one. Um, well, there's a poem that sort of um, makes it hard to tell what what way you read it. And that's Flesh on page 57. We're going to go over that one as well. So that one should be interesting to go over. I don't see any others that have a caesura, but if you really want to look at what a caesura is, you can check out the poem Beowulf. It's spelled Beowulf, I think. If I'm spelling that right, just a second, I'll write it down for my head. Yeah, I think that's how you spell it. So if you want to look that up, that's what it is. Punctuation, obviously, it's commas, periods, dashes, um, slashes, which make up sort of pauses in how you're reading it. Then there's enjambment. Enjambment is where one line sort of ends on one line but also continues onto the next line. So it's sort of like bridging these two lines. And it makes it really interesting because sometimes it makes a double meaning of what the line is actually saying. And then there's the epigraph. So an epigraph is sort of like a prologue almost to your poem. You can also use epigraphs in prose pieces. So just to um, make sure that you understand that. You can even use it in an essay where you take a line of poetry or something else um, and use it as sort of like the theme of your of what you're writing. So, for example, if you go to page, I swear there was one here that had an epigraph. I just have to find it again. Oh, Ars Poetica on page 55 of Indian Coping Mechanisms. There's an epigraph in italics at the top, which was written by somebody else and which informs the rest of the poem. So that's sort of like what an epigraph is supposed to do. So when you're looking at form, there's also symbolism, which is the intangible made tangible. So what I mean by that is like if you're looking at a symbol, it's the intangible concept made tangible. So say you're looking at a crown. When you're looking at the tangible form of a crown is literally just a piece of metal made in a circle that goes on someone's head. Like it's a hat. A crown is a hat. But if you're looking at the actual symbolism behind it, the intangible idea behind the crown is that it's supposed to indicate power, royalty, nobility, that type of thing. So, without the intangible symbolism behind the crown, it wouldn't mean anything. We're moving on to metaphor. A metaphor is a direct comparison. So, what I mean by direct comparison is that it's not a simile, which is a comparison using like or as. So, for example, if you were looking at something like Shakespeare, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Um, that's a simile, whereas a metaphor doesn't use like or as. So, I'll just use one that I've heard before. The sun is a bright copper penny. So it just uses the word is to make the comparison. So there's no sort of distancing using like or as. Lastly, there's allegory, which is a running metaphor that has two meanings that are both equally important: a literal layer and a metaphorical layer that makes that sort of make up the two different layers. So one good example of an allegory is the Fairy Queen, which is a really long poem, um, and it has a literal meaning, which is that there's a knight on a quest, and then it has a metaphorical layer, which is biblical and talks about morality and lessons in sort of like the moral realm. So that's sort of what an allegory is. When we're looking at narrative, there's also imagery. So imagery is something that um, poets use in order to evoke emotion and vivid pictures in the mind of the person who is reading it. An example, if you look at Belcourt lines 21 to 22, he lay himself flat in the hallway like a welcome mat. So, lastly, we're going to look at themes. So, how do you experience the poem? Is sort of like the question you should ask yourself. So, a theme is an idea, an experience, or a subject. For example, what does it mean when you say that a party is 90s themed? What makes it 90s themed? What are the components of themes? So maybe if you were um, making a 90s themed party, you would have people dressed in clothes from the 90s or play music from the time period of the 90s. Um, all these sort of like physical things that indicate 90s-ness. So here's some examples of themes. These are not an exhaustive list of themes, but here's some examples. So coming of age. An example of this is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a coming of age story. Death, dying, or aging. Um, so that's a little bit different than coming of age because coming of age is more like a youth thing where you're just like, okay, I'm coming from being a child to moving to being an adult. It's a maturity thing. Whereas death, dying, or aging is more about changing lifestyles or habits that come with realizing um, the sort of importance of life versus death and sort of like the finality of death. Resistance. Um, resistance can mean many things. Um, it can mean resistance of an idea or a system or a framework. Like it can mean a lot of things. Utopia and dystopia. So, if you've read The Hunger Games, you've read a dystopia for sure. Um, and a dystopia, you know that it's a dystopia because there's various things that indicate that it's a dystopia, such as controlling government um, and people suffering um, because of that oppressive government. The theme of change, so it could be something like realizing that you have a disability, maybe that could be a change. A theme of change, or realizing that you have a relative that you didn't know you had, or going to school. And that's related to the theme of learning or a Bildungsroman. So, a Bildungsroman is a book in which the protagonist, through a series of events, learns that they were wrong or somehow culpable in something that is morally not right. And they change over the course of the book because they have to um, understand that what they were doing before wasn't the right thing. So, those are the themes. So, that is my lecture on um, poetry. I hope that that helps, and I will see you in class today.